Welcome to today's Explainer. We are going to be talking about the history and impact of OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. You know, it's actually a perfect example of how structure, data, and clear legislation can literally save lives. We're going to travel back to the 1960s when a massive public health crisis was unfolding right on the factory floors and construction sites of America, and see exactly how a structured legislative framework stepped in and completely solved it.
14,000. Take a second to really let that number sink in. Back in the 1960s, that was the staggering amount of workers who were dying on the job every single year in the U.S. I mean, we're talking about 14,000 people leaving for work in the morning and just never coming home, year after year. It was an absolute crisis of occupational safety.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the 1960s workplace crisis, then look at the OSHA Act of 1970, the three new safety agencies it created, OSHA's coverage and duties, and finally, decades of changing strategies. We're going to demystify this massive regulatory framework step by step.
All right, starting off with Section 1, the 1960s workplace crisis.
To really understand why OSHA exists, we have to look at what the 1960s were actually like. As the American workforce was booming, the dangers were skyrocketing right along with it. Disabling injuries had shot up by 20%. And you know that dire human cost? It directly translated into an absolutely unsustainable economic burden. We're talking massive losses in production and wages, astronomical medical expenses, and a staggering amount of disability compensation putting a huge weight on the nation's commerce. It became crystal clear that a federal legislative solution was absolutely necessary to fix this.
So, that brings us to Section 2, the OSH Act of 1970. Faced with this massive crisis, the federal government had to act. On December 29, 1970, President Richard Nixon officially signed the Occupational Safety and Health Act into law. And the stated purpose is so powerful. It was, quote, to assure so far as possible every working man and woman in the nation safe and healthful working conditions and to preserve our human resources, end quote. That phrasing right there, it transformed what could have been a dry bureaucratic mandate into a profound nationwide mission to protect human life.
Moving right along to Section 3, three new safety agencies.
Now, to actually execute a mission that massive, the Act used what we call the Rule of Three. It created three distinct, permanent agencies to efficiently handle the heavy lifting. First up, we have OSHA itself, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Housed within the Labor Department, their specific role is to be the active boots on the ground, tasked directly with setting and enforcing those vital workplace safety and health standards.
But you can't enforce rules without solid data, right? And that brings us to the second agency, NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Placed in what was then the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, they have a very distinct, specialized lane. They aren't the enforcers, they are dedicated strictly to conducting occupational safety and health research to figure out exactly what's dangerous and how we can fix it.
And the third pillar is OSHRC, the Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission. Think of them as the independent adjudicators. They're tasked with handling enforcement actions that get challenged by employers. Having this independent body was absolutely crucial to handle disputes and keep the entire regulatory system balanced and fair.
Next up is Section 4, OSHA coverage and duties. So, let's look at who this law actually protects, because the scope here is just huge. It casts an umbrella over employers and employees in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and all other federal territories. It covers private sector fields across the board: manufacturing, construction, agriculture, medicine, you name it. And this blanket of protection is provided either directly by federal OSHA or through an OSHA-approved state program.
So what do their day-to-day mechanics actually look like? Well, these bullet points are the foundational tasks OSHA performs to save lives. On the proactive side, they encourage employers and employees to actively reduce hazards, and they provide research for new safety methods. Crucially, they maintain strict reporting and record-keeping systems, because let's face it, you can't improve what you aren't tracking. Then they use all that data to develop and enforce mandatory job safety standards and to monitor those state-level programs.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, decades of changing strategies.
You know, an agency this massive couldn't just stay static over the years. It had to strategically evolve to become more efficient. Back in the 1970s, it was all about putting an initial base of widely accepted standards into place. By the 1980s, they shifted to minimizing regulatory burdens, finding a better balance of education and enforcement, and then the 1990s brought us the new OSHA, which was all about cutting through the red tape and brilliantly targeting their inspections right on the highest need workplaces.
And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate payoff of all that evolution. When you compare 1971 to the modern day, the U.S. workforce basically doubled, jumping from 56 million to 105 million workers. The number of work sites nearly doubled too. Logically, you'd expect workplace fatalities to double right along with it. But instead, fatalities were actually cut by 50%, and injuries and illnesses dropped by 40%. It is just absolute proof of the profound impact of this structured legislation.
We've seen how this incredible strategy saved thousands of lives, but here's the big question. With the U.S. workforce continuing to grow in size and complexity, how will safety standards continue to evolve to protect the next generation of workers? It's a fascinating challenge, and understanding this history really sets the stage for what comes next. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I will see you next time.